Yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, and I sporadically upload videos to this channel, whether they be book reviews. This is the one we'll be talking about today, or stuff about writing, or whatever. It's been like over a year, I think, since the last video. Oops. Life kind of got in the way. But today I will be drinking this Black Rifle vanilla coffee, not sponsored by the way, just delicious, out of my Marauders Map mug. Yes, I'm that kind of nerd. I got some vanilla creamer from the local dairy in there, some collagen powder. We're good to go. So I recently read The Vampire Diaries by L.J. Smith, and this is The Awakening and the Struggle, so I think it's 2 books in one. I got it for really cheap from a vintage marketplace. I'm glad I picked it up. I'm glad I read it. I just want to put that first and foremost. Because I have been such a big closeted fan of the television series, I felt like I had to get out my feelings about the book, because everyone I talk to who read the book and watched the show always say the book is better, right? And that's typically how it goes. Well, this is one of those rare instances where, yeah, the show is like 1,000 times better than the book. Now, that being said, the writing's decent, and I actually finished it in less than 24 hours. So I'm not complaining necessarily, but there are just some things I had to get off my chest. So I'm not really one to speak on the writing style and all that kind of stuff. My highest level of education was an English 102 class in community college that I didn't even finish, and I didn't do well in. I don't think the professor liked me very much. And then I took many creative writing classes in junior high and high school. So that's the extent of my education. So take what I say with a grain of salt. As I said, this is a rare case of the show, or the movie, I guess it would be the show in this case, is better than the book. All of the changes the show made were for the better, I think, in my humble opinion. And in both cases, I believe that Damon and Matt were the best parts of both the book and the show. The show keeps their characters largely unchanged. The only difference I noticed, and again, I've only read the first 2 books, I did not read the whole series, is that the show seems to humanize Damon a little more in the beginning. Yeah. In my opinion, the books read like a decent self-edited, self-published book on Amazon. Now, if you often buy books off Amazon, you know what I'm talking about. There are those books that you either download for a free promotional, or you buy and you start reading it and you go, did this person even like read through it a second time, or did they just plop it down on the paper and hit publish? And then there are the books that are clearly self-edited, or maybe they had someone read through it once or twice and help with the editing and the beta reading and all that, but you can still kind of tell, like, yeah, they didn't really have anyone super professional go through it. It's like that. I think I caught 2 typos, but that was it. And usually, even in major books like The Hunger Games or Harry Potter or something like that, there's always going to be a typo that you see. You can't catch everything. Decent. That's what I mean by decent. It reads well, and I didn't want to throw the book across the room because of all the errors, which there weren't very many of. There are moments of writing genius in the book. There are some beautiful metaphors, some just gorgeous descriptions. There are twice as many moments of writing cringe or bore. So by that, I mean, I don't necessarily mean the style of the author or the technical parts of the writing. I just mean the events. Like, something happens that isn't really that believable, relatable, or realistic. One problem I had with the technical side of the writing is that it does tend to switch point of view sporadically and randomly without warning. And In my opinion, I believe the author was trying to do like a third person omniscient point of view, and it didn't really come out very well. Usually there's some kind of indicator that you're about to jump into somebody else's head. There's an art about it that it just felt clunky and very sudden, and it was jarring, and it kind of brought me out of the story at times. There were page breaks where it didn't feel like there should be page breaks, and then there were no page breaks where I felt like there should be some. But it was jarring when she's writing from one point of view and then suddenly in the next paragraph, without any kind of clear indication, that you're just suddenly seeing things from another character's point of view. I understood what was happening within a few seconds, but it still brings you out of what's going on, especially when what's going on isn't that captivating to begin with. And then there were times where the characters, particularly Elena, would know things that she shouldn't have, and the only reason I knew of those things were because the author had told me in the narration, and then all of a sudden Elena knew about them, and it wasn't clear that she should have known about that situation or person or whatever the case was. And as beautiful as the descriptions and the metaphors were at times, some of them were used multiple times throughout the book, which gets repetitive. Of course, that being said, it may not have seemed as repetitive if I hadn't binge read this book. If I hadn't sat down at 1 p.m., actually it was closer to 2:30 or 3 o'clock p.m. one day and finished it by 2 p.m. the next day, maybe it wouldn't have felt so repetitive. One thing that I really enjoyed about the book and the writing style of the author is that she knows how to end a chapter, and sometimes in a chilling, goosebumpy kind of way, if you know what I'm talking about. There were times where she ended a chapter with an ominous visual, a chilling detail, a feeling of finality, which really, really works for the kind of book that she wrote. She really did get the creepy factor across, which is fantastic. I really loved reading that. I do know that a lot of authors, including myself, really struggle with how to end a chapter. So kudos to L.J. Smith for being able to do that really, really well. Okay, now we're moving on to the content. So this book has been out forever. The show has been out and ended forever. So I really shouldn't have to give a warning about spoilers, but if you want to read the book or you want to watch the show and you haven't done either of those things, then I guess don't watch the rest of the video. If you are leaving now, please like and subscribe and share and come back later, I guess, when you've read the book or watched the show. So the content. Contrary to the TV show, the book Elena is a self-centered, vain, power-hungry, and myopic. She can't see past her own agenda, and she uses her friends and her family for her own gain. So that's something that I liked about that the show changed, is that Elena is more than just queen bee of the school with her own agenda. She clearly cares about her friends and her family, and that was a good change that they made to the show. She does do everything she can to maintain her queen bee position in school, and the only reason she really checks in with her friends to see how they're doing is so she can keep the appearance of being a caring friend, but she always has ulterior motives and is very much a mean girl. As soon as she has what she wants from that person, she kind of just discards them once they lose their usefulness. She only goes after Stefan so that Caroline can't have him. Obviously, there's an air of mystery about him when he shows up at the school, and everybody's interested in him, including Elena. But the second Caroline starts showing interest, Elena has this possessive, obsessive thing for him, which is really creepy. One issue I had about the story is that her parents' death is only mentioned twice, maybe 3 times, and that tends to be a pretty big part of the show, which makes sense because her parents just died. She's trying to get through that. She's got some issues, as does her sibling and the rest of her family that show up in the show, but in the book it's like nobody cares. Nobody asks her how she's doing. She doesn't. It's like her parents died, which happens before the book starts, and it's mentioned, and then that's it. The only reference really emotionally for Elena to that is at the very, very beginning of the book. Literally, like the first page, she's coming home from a trip and she feels like a stranger in her own house, in her own life, because her parents aren't there. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. This is going to be great, like a great book, because they're going through the PTSD and the emotions and the this and that other of losing your parent, of Elena losing her parents, but that's really the only reference to their death that the author makes. And I kind of have an issue with that, because Elena literally just jumps back into her selfish, egotistical ways. I just feel like it should have been mentioned a lot more often, and in different ways, of course, not just like, oh yeah, Elena's parents are dead. And maybe even if the author wanted her to come across as selfish and vain, she could have even used her parents' death to her advantage for sympathy and whatnot. And she really just doesn't do that. It is what it is. The other issue I had with some of the story is that there's almost zero relationship development. And what I mean by that, so the only exception, in my opinion, is the relationship between Elena and Matt, and it's only because the author does mention that they had been best friends growing up and they dated, and then right at the beginning of the book, Elena breaks up with him, and then they go back to being friends, and it's awkward. So even though it's a little clunky, that's the best relationship development in the book. So what I mean by zero relationship development is mostly between Elena and Stefan. Stefan shows up as this mysterious guy at school, handsome, aloof. And Elena doesn't even exchange. She like talks 3 words at him, and it's awkward because he ignores her. And he kind of just appears to not want anything to do with her. So she doesn't even say a full sentence to him because he walks off. And then 3 weeks later, after nothing, after no speaking, no nothing, they're kissing in his boarding house room. And she's telling him that she loves him. Now, right before this, he does save her from a precarious situation with Tyler. So again, after half a sentence and no interaction, and 3 weeks later, he's saving her from Tyler, and then they're kissing in his room, and she's saying that she loves him. She is just like grossly obsessed with Stefan. The only thing is that he allows it after a certain amount of time. Their relationship is extremely toxic. In almost 500 pages, all they can think about is each other, which I get. When you start dating someone, there's a honeymoon phase where that's all you can think about, but it's to a point where their other relationship and responsibilities suffer. And the author kind of romanticizes this, which is like, ugh, yikes. Elena treats her family and friends like trash, the ones that do stick around for some reason. And the only one who calls her out on her behavior is Caroline, who in the book is her best friend turned enemy. And then toward the end, her aunt, in Elena's mind, ends up being unfair and another enemy because she also calls her out on her behavior. So anyone who calls out Elena's toxic behavior is described as her enemy for life, basically. And everyone else, for some reason, excuses her behavior and sticks around to serve her higher agenda. Yeah. Another issue I had. So if you recall, the author writes Elena coming across as vain and self-serving, power-hungry. So she claims to hate Damon, who is Stefan's brother, who shows up later and is pretty much all the bad sides of being a vampire. Yet she finds herself attracted to him over and over and over again. And I think in the book he was using compulsion on her, but they don't make that super duper clear. But when he offers her power and eternal life, she denies him. And this didn't track in my mind. The issue I have with this is the author literally spends an entire book building Elena up as vain, egocentric, power hungry, everything that I just said. She literally jumps at any and every chance to keep her youthful beauty, but she turns him down. It really doesn't track, and it doesn't come across as believable, and it's not very clear why, other than she's hopelessly in love with Stefan. If she's supposed to have some kind of character development here and grow as a character, it's not made very clear. She just goes from this vain, myopic high school girl to obsessed with Stefan. Okay, again, spoiler alert, there is a murder. If you have seen the show, you'll know who this is, but it's the murder of Mr. Tanner, and I had a big problem with this scene. Not necessarily that he was murdered, because that happened in the show too. The actual events leading to the murder and the murder itself was fine. I had no problem with that. It was everything that happened afterward. This is what happens. Mr. Tanner fills in at the haunted house event at the high school for a teacher who's sick, who is supposed to be the sacrifice at the end of the haunted house and covered in blood, and, sits up and scares the students. As the kids file through, he just lays there. Bonnie goes to see what's going on and discovers that he's actually dead. Tyler, who has a vendetta against Stefan now because he stopped him from assaulting Elena, doesn't even react to the fact that there's someone dead in the same room, or that he was killed while they were all standing there and nobody saw. Instead, he convinces everyone within about 2.5 seconds that Stefan is the murderer, and he creates a mob that tears apart the crime scene before the cops even show up, just to get or find Stefan, who has disappeared. When the cops finally do show up, there's no consequence for the crime scene being completely destroyed. And they do post up at the front doors to keep anyone from coming or going. But conveniently, they leave the back doors wide open, and Elena escapes to find Stefan because, a several 100-year-old vampire can't fend for himself, but her very best friend, who found and touched a dead body, be totally fine.
She's fine. Everything's fine.
Also, until Alaric shows up, the school goes on as usual the very next day after their teacher and coach is murdered in front of their eyes. Everyone's fine.
Everything's fine. It's fine.
There's no mention of grief counselors, no cancellation of classes, except the class that Mr. Tanner taught, and it's only canceled because they have no substitute. And football practice is canceled, which is an odd thing to mention because literally it was never said before that Mr. Tanner was the coach. So I don't know why they would have said now anyway, it's all horribly unrealistic. It just doesn't make sense the way it happens, and I don't have the words to describe the amount of nonsense that it is. Elena doesn't check in once with her friends who found the dead body. She doesn't ask how they're doing. The amount of self-obsession is absolutely outrageous. There's no resulting PTSD from seeing Mr. Tanner's dead body, so Bonnie just goes on as usual, and her friends continue to blindly follow her horrible, reckless, and self-absorbed plans. Now, that is something I will say that the show does really, really well. Maybe it's not super realistic, but at least they try to show the resulting PTSD from things like watching somebody die. This isn't all to say that Elena and Stefan's relationship still isn't toxic in the show, because I definitely think it is a little bit. However, the Elena in the TV show is a lot more down to earth. She mourns her parents' death to a much more realistic level, and though she has a hint of unhealthy obsession about Stefan, she also has very clear boundaries that she sticks to very solidly. The book Elena just makes excuses for his creepy behavior and secret keeping, and the excuse is almost always, oh, he loves me so much. It's naive of her. It is absolutely insane, obsessive, crazy person behavior from Elena. She actually reminds me of one of those girls in school who had a raging crush on a boy and pursues him despite him showing no interest, giving no indication that he's interested in her, snubs her at every opportunity so as not to give any mixed signals, but she goes on to tell people that they're dating anyway and she's in love with him. And that's exactly her character. So you know the kind of girl I'm talking about. The only difference is that poor Stefan actually gives in for some reason. I know these books and the show have been out and ended for a long time. If you're expecting the books to be even better than the show, as they usually are, you'll be sorely disappointed. I've always been a huge fan of the show. I've always admired the writing and the attention to detail and the world building and the myth making. I think it's brilliant. There are cringe moments, but I think the brilliance of all that writing makes up for the cringe. The book is nothing like it. To me, it feels like something I would have written in like early high school with limited life experience, something out of a fantasy that I need to slap down on paper without much thought to the realism.
But it's a vampire book. It's not supposed to be realistic.
Yes, to a point. It's a supernatural story set in current times. There needs to be a certain level of realism to even relate, much less get sucked into the story. There were very few moments that I could relate to any of the characters. There were some, but very few. And there were far fewer moments, dare I say none, where I actually got sucked in.
Pun intended.
I would not recommend wasting your time with this book unless your boredom is at a critical level and you're curious and you can obtain the book for free by legal means, say the library. Just my opinion. It was readable. I did finish it. At least there's that. There have been books that I've started and just cannot finish at all. So that's saying something. And there were things that I liked about it. Just not very many. If you would like this very book that is in my hands and you live in the area, I will be dropping it off in the book barn at Morning Fresh Dairy Farm in Bellevue, Colorado this coming Sunday. So that is Sunday, October 20th. Just in time for Halloween.
Ooh, spooky.
And you can look for it then. It'll probably be later in the afternoon that it'll be available. Have you read these books? Better yet, have you seen the show, and what did you think of either or both of them, and how would you compare them? Did you agree with what I had to say? Did you like the book better than the show? Did you hate the show for some crazy reason? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe for more content, and until next time, ladies and gents, happy reading.